All right, hello everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Employee Onboarding Trends for 2023. I'm David Wentworth. I'm Principal Learning Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and I'm very excited to introduce you to my guests today. First up, we've got Rahul Arora. He's the Chairman and CEO of MPS Limited. As an alumnus of the Indian School of Business and Babson College, Rahul leads the growth agenda as chairman and CEO of MPS, which is the parent company of EI. Rahul's vision for MPS is to create a compelling learning company at a meaningful scale that helps the world learn smarter. At EI, Rahul is leading its teams to power emotionally intelligent learning experiences for its customers by combining the power of human connection and empathy. I'm also joined by Alison Hansen, who is the Director of Learning and Development at PepsiCo Foods North America. She's an experienced director with a demonstrated history of working in the consumer goods industry. She leads 3 learning design and development teams at PepsiCo Foods North America, PFNA for short, which produces many well-loved brands such as Cheetos, Doritos, and Lay's, along with Gatorade and Quake. Her teams focus on building skill and capability in PFNA's sales, supply chain, and global business services functions. Other roles include leading PFNA's large-scale leadership programs and 5 years at PepsiCo University, a global center of excellence. She's been at PFNA for almost 8 years, spent 10 years at the corporate office of Mary Kay working in Latin America, Asia, and US markets, and started her career at Accenture in human performance business consulting. She's skilled in creating large-scale learning experiences, communications, leading global initiatives, global consumer marketing, and strategic planning. I am also joined by Jennifer Zaborowski, Director of IT Learning and Development at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. Jennifer leads IT's rapidly growing and learning and development function, encompassing IT training, IT knowledge management, enterprise data literacy, IT internship programs, IT Jumpstart, and IT Framework. Through strategic collaborations with human resources, IT leadership, platform, and creative training partners, deliver a comprehensive learning and development function that encompasses workforce planning, career development, skill and capability building, and talent pipeline. So I am joined by some pretty heavy hitters today, and I'm excited about it. We would also, of course, love to thank our sponsor, MPS Limited, for sponsoring today's webinar and giving us the hour. MPS Limited is an emotionally intelligent learning experience design company that partners with customers in their digital transformation journey. They have over 3 decades of experience in designing learning and performance support solutions that drive performance gain and maximize training ROI and ROE. They deliver high-impact learning solutions that drive deeper and more meaningful learner engagement, enable effective upskilling, and improve employee performance, and create a high ROI for the business and organization. From strategy to development to delivery and measurement, they work with their customers to ensure training investments deliver business results. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. We have several certification programs currently open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. So you can visit certification.brandonhall.com to learn more about that and how to earn that designation. Our surveys, they're very important to us, obviously, and your participation is one of the most critical elements of our research. So if there are any surveys that you might find on our webpage at Open Surveys, please feel free to visit that and take part. You will receive complimentary research if you do participate in our survey. So we definitely appreciate that if you can do it. But more about today and right now. We want you to be able to engage with us. So to ask a question, there is a question panel on your control bar, and you can ask us directly via that. And there's a way for us to manage those questions. But of course, there's also a chat function, which we know that folks like to use the chat. So feel free to talk to one another. We'll keep an eye on it in case we see something for us as well. So please make good use of both of those functions today. We want you to be a part of the conversation. The presentation is being recorded. We'll share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation in about 24 hours. If you want to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, there will be a link in the chat momentarily. And so we're looking forward to talking to you today, and really I encourage you to take advantage of those tools so we can hear from you. With that, let's go ahead and get in, just a refresher on who we're going to be talking with today. And yeah, so obviously the topic here is onboarding, specifically the training and learning elements of onboarding, right? I think there's a lot of times when the term onboarding is used, it's focused very heavily on the ideas of filling out forms, getting people up to speed, that sort of thing. But there's this really critical element in there that's becoming more and more important every day, is how do we make sure that people have the tools and the skills that they need to get up and running quickly, to become assimilated, to feel like everything's working well. And it's a really critical moment in that onboarding period. And we've seen in our research that organizations do challenge, are challenged with this. Fewer than 1 in 10 have a fully set, integrated set of onboarding resources where the things that they're doing in onboarding are connected fully with L&D, with talent management and other processes, right? It's still very siloed, focused as a very core HR transactional function. So, you look at our maturity level and you've only got 9%. It's sort of at that upper echelon level where there's that fully linked onboarding process. Most organizations find themselves, at least the biggest group on this curve, in that level 2 where it's developing. They're working on it. They're trying to get it more formalized, make those connections, but companies aren't necessarily there yet. So there's a lot of work that can be done. And I think we're seeing a much better communication and collaboration between sort of that core HR onboarding piece and the learning and development piece to make it more meaningful, because it's so important now. So we're going to talk about some of the current challenges. We're going to talk about getting those new hires engaged and retrained and keeping them on staff. I mean, that's the reason why it's so important is that losing new hires, right? You make that investment in someone and then it turns out it doesn't work out and they move on. It can be a pretty costly exercise. So really trying to retain talent in a very volatile talent environment, I guess we could call it, very important. And then thinking about trends to think about moving forward. And of course, because we have Jennifer and Alison here, we're going to hear directly about how their organizations are managing some of these challenges and some of the successes that they've had. So with that, let's sort of bring in some context to the whole thing. And obviously, we're in a very unique environment. There's this big talent issue that's going on right now with, trying hard to find the right talent, trying to hold on to the talent that we do have. And of course, we still feel the effects of the pandemic. They're creating this interesting dynamic of, who wants to work where and when and how, especially during onboarding. How are we onboarding people who maybe never set foot in the building? So as we think about that, if we could pull up a poll and if you think to yourself, what's the biggest challenge you faced in your organization over the last year when it comes to onboarding employees? Was it that engagement, really getting those people engaged in the organization? Was it keeping them? Maybe organizations had some trouble with retention. Understanding the progress, like how well they're doing. How do I know that they're on the right track? Or what kind of impact that your programs are having. Alexa, is that poll up? I don't see if it is or not. Maybe we don't. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. So yeah, if you folks could take a shot at that and give us some thoughts on what, if you had to pick one. Obviously, there's usually more than one challenge at play in any organization. But over the last year, what would you say would be the biggest challenge you had? And as that's up, I see people are taking part in the chat, so that's great. I really appreciate that folks are saying who they are and where they're from and talking about all the different things. So that's awesome. All right, so let's to make sure we don't waste any more time. I'm going to go ahead. If you can close that poll, Alexa, and we'll see the results. And here we go. Wow, it's a pretty even spread, and hopefully my guests can see this as well. It's just no one thing stands out, right? So it's not too surprising. And I'm sure if we let you pick, I think we would have seen most people pick all or most of these, right? The biggest one at 30% being just understanding and evaluating the progress of the new hires. That's an important key to see how things are going. So it's interesting to see that there is no one standout. There's just a host of challenges that everybody's facing. So I appreciate you taking part in that particular survey. And just to sort of round out that thinking, when we look at what we found in our research, what is challenging your onboarding process in organizations, there was a few standouts in the research, and one is, and it's something that you can probably apply to almost anything, is that there's just too many other priorities, right? We've got the people hired, we know what we need them to do, we can't really focus too much more attention on this onboarding process. But given the implications of this process being done poorly, it's important to actually make it a priority. But you can see that's a challenge. It's just not only so much time and energy in the day, and then right behind that, there's only so much money to be had, right? There's the budget. is the next big thing. But when you start to get into more tactical things, the lack of hiring manager or supervisor experience in that process, a lack of staffing people to manage it, and then a technology to sort of make it all work. But this gives you a sense of the different types of challenges that companies face, but the fact that onboarding has been seen as a relatively low priority for organizations. So here's where I want to start bringing in my guests and to start sharing your knowledge. And Rahul, I'll start with you. Thinking through these challenges, the things that we saw from the audience today, the things that we've seen in our research, what kinds of things should organizations be doing when they think about their onboarding programs to sort of meet some of these challenges?
Thanks, David, for that excellent question, and warm welcome to everyone to the webinar. So from my perspective, I like to think in buckets of three. So I'll begin. We've all heard this phrase called, it takes a village to raise a child. I'm living that personally as a father to a 10-month-old. I think of onboarding in very similar ways. Onboarding really is everyone's responsibility. That's, from my perspective, the first level of realignment. And while developing a culture that embraces this combined sense of responsibility is possibly more long-term, I do feel that organizations can develop tactics to get people more involved. The onboarding process needs to be about creating a network that new hires can learn from, and not just a single buddy or a single mentor. So it's more about a network. The second level of realignment, from my perspective, is understanding that onboarding is a journey and not an event. And that's how the programs need to be structured. The network that you created needs to exist for new hires to leverage on, not just in the beginning, but possibly for 6 months or even a year into their career, into the company. And finally, performance data needs to be at the core. Use performance data to show that your return on investment for hiring and keeping top talent. Collecting this performance data is critical. Are hires staying? Are they performing? Are they growing? How do you know this if you aren't measuring this? Making sure that you have the metrics in place to manage this moving forward. At EI, we look at two very interesting metrics: time to productivity and time to proficiency. Time to productivity determines the success rate for a staffing initiative, as well as the ROI of an onboarding program, whereas time to proficiency provides an ROI of the functional or more role-specific onboarding programs. So those are my 2 cents, David.
No, and I think the last point obviously is great. It's very well aligned. What we saw in the survey is that being able to track that progress is so critical. If you just go from hire date to they stayed or they left, you really need to know what happened in between and how they got there. Very important for that. Jennifer, if you could take the first crack at this question that we had was, what are the critical changes that's happened over the last few years that are really pushing a rethink on how we do this onboarding process?
Right. Thanks, David. Welcome, everyone. Delighted to have you all here. From my perspective, obviously, I think all of us have been impacted by the shift in the way that people are working and the distributed workforce from the pandemic. But for Regeneron, we are about to embark on our kind of second phase of hockey stick growth. So for us, the first time we had a big growth spurt, it was localized and in country and relatively easy to get everybody on board and together. But as we've continued to grow, we're looking at global distribution in multiple countries, and clearly it's not practical to fly an IT person every Monday morning to whatever distributed location where people need to be oriented. So for us, it's a combination of rapid growth, incorporated with the distributed workforce model that I think is prevalent in lots of places, and all of that overlaid against the global market, I think is probably a more common model for a lot of companies. It's a little new to us, but we definitely have had to rethink how we're orienting folks, because we certainly want the folks who are remote or localized in another country to have the same in-depth enculturation, pleasant and engaging onboarding process as the folks who are at headquarters.
Yeah, and I see you nodding along, Alison. Does some of those ring true for you, or do you have some also different perspective on some of the changes that have occurred?
Well, I mean, I think that because we can't get people together, it's kind of like what Jennifer was talking about. We have to think of what kind of modalities are we going to serve our learning up in, and how are we going to get people to practice and try to apply what they've learned. That's a key part. That, if we look at old onboarding programs, there were lecture. We don't tend to do that. So yeah, with the distribution of our workforce and also hybrid work we're having to completely rethink the way we approach the content and how we serve that up, how we get people to practice, how we get people to interact with other people, because that's a really important part of onboarding is networking and meeting people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I think it's when it was commonplace and happened all the time, it's often overlooked. It just seems like a given. And then when you take it away and you realize, oh, it was really important that everybody was together in the same room and was able to share that experience. So how do we do it? Yeah, I think it's very critical. So as we sort of all have come to a place, whether we want to or not, have accepted the environment that we are in, what are some of the things that companies are thinking of as they move forward, thinking into 2023? And so, Alexa, we have another poll if you could launch for me. What if you had to pick one? Again, you could, I'm sure, pick all of these, but in your organization, if there was one area where you felt you needed to invest more in 2023, what would it be? It's collaborative learning in that hybrid work place? Is that something that's important for your organization where you might need to invest? And then there's the learning technology, right? Do we need to rethink the technology we're using to drive more learner engagement? Maybe we just need to shift to different formats from what we've been using from the kinds of e-learning experiences that we've had. Maybe we need something new, something different, or maybe we need to invest more time in doing better at measuring those things that Rahul is talking about, right? How do we measure the impact that our onboarding programs are having in things like time to productivity, time to proficiency, retention, all of those things. So if you could just pick whichever one you think for your organization would be, the top of the list looking into the next year. And then go ahead, Alexa, let's go ahead and see the results. And let's see what we've got here. So again, a pretty even split, although now we've got a bit of a standout here around measurement. And, honestly, that doesn't surprise me in that whenever I do anything around learning programs, onboarding, regular learning compliance, anything, measurement is such a critical element that organizations wish they could do better. They're very, very challenged on how to measure the actual impact that their programs are having. They're really good at measuring completion rates. They're really good at measuring, scores and assessments, things like that. But when it comes to, did this thing actually make this other thing happen? It's very challenging. And so that applies in all areas. And I think onboarding is obviously one of those. And as we look at, ahead at what we see in our research around what people are going to be doing, we asked, what approaches do you currently use? What do you plan to implement? And what do you just, it's not even on the radar for you. So you can see there's a lot of experiential learning going on right now. Currently, 81% of companies say that they do some sort of experiential learning that, and I hate to call it on the job because it's more than that. It isn't just, it's providing people the ability to use a skill or a behavior or knowledge in context, right? But there's that experiential learning. So 12% of companies want to do that. So that's big on the list. You still see a lot of formal in-person instructor-led classroom. This is amazing to me because of a few reasons. One, go back to 2019 and prior, ILT in-person, #1 training method across the board, all day, all night. You have the pandemic and it drops off. And then there's all this talk of, well, now we can't get back together and we'll never go back. And that's the death of the classroom. But throughout, despite that first early, say most of 2020, after that, a lot of return to the classroom, which I don't think is a bad thing necessarily. I think there's a lot of great stuff that happens in that in-person environment. I hope we learn to do it better. Hope we learn to do it differently. But we do see, you can see right here in these results that companies want to do more in-person classrooms. Informal training, we see that as well, a lot of that. Not so much down in when you get to the simulations, gamification. Not too surprising given that they're not really applicable to everything, right? You can't use them in every scenario, but we do see that there is some growth there that we're starting to apply that. We see it more in learning in general, and we're starting to see more of this from an onboarding perspective as well. So that leads me to obviously some more questions that we had discussed as a group that we wanted to get out there. And so, Rahul, back to you. That's what we saw from our research that companies were thinking about. What do you hear when you work with clients, when you talk to prospects, or you talk to other organizations? What are some of the key trends that you see coming in this next year?
So I like to answer this in with two perspectives. First, what does EI see as the modern approach to onboarding? And the second, as a business leader, how do I see this? How do I see onboarding through the lens of being in a recessionary macro environment? So to begin with the modern approach, I think the first thing is, like I was describing earlier, journey-based onboarding rather than event-based onboarding. So a core program sandwich between pre-boarding and continued boarding. A pre-boarding program allows you to start building an emotional connect before new hires join. It also helps reduce ghosting situations that many of our customers seem to have grappled with more recently. A continued boarding program carries the onboarding program forward. It structures the employee onboarding training into smaller chunks, like additional orientation, role-specific resources and responsibilities, learning nuggets, bite-sized learning, and networking and collaboration. Second, blended onboarding programs is something that we see are going to be the norm. So not 100% classroom or virtual classroom or 100% mobile learning or e-learning, but a happy medium is something that we're expecting. And then finally, we think experiential learning will possibly follow an 80-20 rule as a rule of thumb for onboarding programs, where 80% of the programs will be more experiential in nature. So that's what we think of in terms of how we see the onboarding cycle progress from a science perspective. From a macroeconomic perspective, what does onboarding look like in the middle of a recession? So firstly, I always think of this as businesses have cycles, and this too shall pass. And when it does, you want to be ready. So this is an excellent time to reimagine your current setup. Audits are great, a great approach. Talking to and doing stakeholder interviews with managers, the latest candidates to gather feedback and implement that feedback. Explore and possibly even intelligently invest in smart tech. For some reason, we all decide to invest in change management and technology programs when either we're super busy or it's too late. So again, thinking about that as well. Again, bringing performance to the core of the onboarding. If you're already there, what's the next leap? If you're not there, setting the baseline. And finally, looking at doing things like stay interviews and succession planning. So while this may seem an odd choice in a time when companies are considering potentially reducing headcount, it seems like now is the perfect time. It also seems like now is the perfect time to interview your top stars, to learn how they feel, what they want, and what they expect. So just two different perspectives depending on where you are as an organization in 2023.
Great. Yeah, no, those are great outlooks for sure. And then, Jennifer, for you, what specific learning strategy for onboarding programs do you think is going to be the biggest, have the most impact on the business coming up?
Yeah, right. Thanks, David. I'll caveat this by saying I am in an IT function, so I do have just a slight bias toward technology-related trends. But that said, another thing that is really informing our choices and our decisions around how we're structuring onboarding is the fact that we're welcoming digital native employees into the workforce. The people that are joining the workforce now, and maybe for the last 5 years or so, don't know what life is like without an internet. They're very accustomed to learning from a screen as well as from a teacher. And the side effect of that is some of them, they like the gamified approach and relatively short attention spans compared to some of us who maybe are in a little different demographic. So for us, the learning strategy that I think will have a pretty significant impact is intelligent use of the technologies that are available now to make interactive learning, to do, as Rahul was saying, the combination, the happy mix of in-person versus on a screen, to serve that population, but also they have uncovered through their ways of working and ways of learning some efficiencies that may not have occurred to some of us who've been around a little longer. So taking advantage of the technology that's enabled and incorporating it intelligently into how we do this. That's something that I've been very grateful to the EI design team for helping us to do. A lot of what we do with them is creating e-learning that has a little bit more of a gamified feel, has the rewards, and it's on screen but still feels engaging. And that, to me, that's a trend that I think is only going to grow through this year and probably into next year as well.
Great. That is very true, I would say. And then for you, Alison, I would just want to know, thinking of that hybrid environment that we talked about, and I know it's a unique environment there at PepsiCo. But what sort of experiences do you think are going to be able to maximize that onboarding in that kind of environment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot to say about what makes great onboarding. I mean, we could talk. We all have our preferences and our tips here. But I would say, if you're creating learning experiences, we have to think about how people learn today, the modern learning experience. And these new hires that want to be in the driver's seat, they want to take control of their onboarding. And so you can't just have them go through a path that's completely linear. They have to have some flexibility in how they do that. Also, some of our programs that we're building are role-based. So you can go in and select, hey, I have this kind of experience, and you can skip some part of your onboarding. And so you don't have to spend your time there. So those are a couple elements. I would say, like I mentioned before, the networking is really great to have get people connected in their organization. Peer learning is great if you have people working on projects together, those kinds of things. Multimodality, we already talked about, some BILT or ILT plus some kind of e-learning or gamified, even simulations. All those things are really great. And you want to get people to practice those skills and those things that they're learning, because we don't want them to just learn it and it goes straight out of their head. One final thing I would just say too is that when we're talking about learning experiences, that's also connected to content. And if you design an onboarding program and put everything in there, people are going to forget it.
Yeah.
So you have to really sequence that well and say, what does this person need to know right now? And so we say just in time, not just in case. We're not going to load them up with, oh, they might need to know this. We're going to say, this is what I think this person needs to know now.
Yeah, that's great. And it goes back to your point about that when you mentioned the role-based, which I think is so critical too, this idea that part of the problem with the onboarding is people are overwhelmed from every direction. It isn't just learning. They're getting stuff coming from everywhere. And if you're providing them stuff that they don't even need, then that's even worse, right? You're just piling on. And so it's like, you're able to do that role-based, like, here, you don't need this, it's redundant or not relevant. Here's exactly what you're creating, a better experience for that person. So they're happier, they're more engaged. You're also shortening their onboarding time because they don't have to wade through all this useless out of context material. So I think all of those points are very well taken. Thank you. And I know there are a couple of questions came in, and I do want to ask them, but I think there's a good spot where I'm going to do that. If first thing we wanted to do sort of is just talk through what we've seen, and as a group we were discussing this and just looking at our own experiences, the priorities for 2023. And so we know that it's really about companies are focused on how do we optimize our business results in this potentially, I mean, it's already pretty uncertain, but we're potentially period of that volatility, uncertainty, right? Complexity, ambiguity, all those great things. So how do we, focus on the business results during that time? What role can onboarding play in that? How do we attract the right people and then keep them? And then how do we make this all part of the overall digital transformation of the organization? Organizations also want to do a lot of work at improving organizational culture. So onboarding is obviously a great part of that. If you're starting to develop that culture, you want to start early, get people engaged and involved in that. And then upskilling and reskilling is a big focus for folks moving through 2023. And I think, this all comes back to what onboarding really is. It's really getting people started on the right foot. And there was a question earlier that came in about how do I get, C-level to buy into some of these things that we talk about because it doesn't get enough attention. The idea is, if you can make that investment at the right moment, it solves so many problems that happen far down the road that are much more time consuming and much more expensive, right? The idea of getting people what they need when they need it, get them up and running, get them engaged. So you don't want to be fighting this engagement battle uphill from day one, right? You want people sort of on the downslope of that as they start. They're already bought in, they're already excited about it, and you're not having to build that later. We're going to get into the case studies. I wanted to ask a couple of quick questions other questions that came in. And people are talking about a lot in the chat too, measurement, right? And listen, there's a whole other series of webinars that I know I've done, that I'm sure other people that are my guests have participated in, measurements and another topic altogether. It's just very challenging and it's hard. And that's why companies are challenged by it, because for many reasons, they don't have the right metrics. They don't know what the right metrics should be. They don't know who or where in the organization they should look to find those things. So everything sorts of learning tends to start to turn inward, right? And only look inside itself and say, well, we built this, we delivered it, people took it, and they're not able to take that next step out and look. And so onboarding, it is critical, as Rahul was mentioning, being able to measure based on what's happening in the business. The team leaders, are they saying, yes, these new people are now able to do X, Y, Z, these things are happening. Finding out what those outcomes are, communicating those between business leaders and learning, so you can speak the same language and say, this is what matters to me. What does that mean for learning? Those kinds of things. But like I said, I don't think we can really unpack all that today. I know it's a lot of discussion in the chat. Feel free to keep going on with that there. But yeah, measurement is an entire other animal altogether. Okay, so we do want to sort of dive into the real nuts and bolts of how this actually works, what this looks like. And so what I want to do is hand over to Jennifer, and she's going to talk about the experience at Regeneron.
Awesome, thank you. So taking a look at a little bit of our backgrounds with Regeneron's onboarding, originally when I joined the company in 2013, it was completely in person. When you were a new hire, you were escorted to one of the two corporate headquarters, the manufacturing site, or where I am at the research site. You sat in a classroom for most of your first day. You were rescued by your manager and fed much, much later in the day. For us, we segmented it by area, which if you think about it, there's a logic to that. You want somebody who manages things like 401k, who's explaining the 401k, not someone like me who's most proficient in something like technology. So the new hires would sit through someone from each area coming and talking about, you would hope, the key information from that space. IT was really missing an opportunity because there's a cohort in our onboarding that is everybody from somebody who has just completed college up through a very seasoned senior executive VP. They're all in the same room. And we were missing an opportunity because our onboarding segment would be to send in folks from our help desk area. And it was focused on things like, were you able to log in? Let's reset your password. Do you understand how to use some of these basic productivity tools? So it didn't really showcase the partnership aspect of IT, the collaboration aspect, and we were not making maybe our best first impression. So that was some of the stuff that we looked at when we first started tackling onboarding for a refresh. You can probably go to the next slide, David. Thank you. So talking with our partners at EI Design, we wanted to fix a lot of that and still keep it nice and concise, to roughly the same length of time as we would have been in person, but make it engaging. We didn't want it to feel distant or sitting through a video or anything like that. We wanted it to be something the learner participated in. We wanted to take that opportunity to reposition IT as a partner and a collaborator, but very much agreeing with something Alison said about just in time what we needed to know. New hires still need to know how to get help on Teams if they've never used it before, or if they need access to something for their job. How do these very pragmatic, important things, but balance that with the IT as a solution partner, as a collaborator, and really introduce them to us as someone they will be collaborating with at a strategic level, as well as making sure that they have the productivity services that they need. And so the approach took in my area, IT training, working directly in collaboration with the different IT functions, our research area, our commercial area, enterprise and infrastructure services, HR, to find out what you need to know right away content is. But also, one of the things that was most fun for me was talking to them about what is some of the really interesting, innovative, collaborative work that you're doing with our partners in the business that will really resonate with our learners as they're getting to know us and as we're making an important first impression. So moving on a little bit to the solution, David, thank you. So where we landed was an e-learning, which alleviated some of the complexity that I mentioned before about our rapid growth. Just simply not enough people from IT to do orientation if we were going to stick to that classroom model, but also things like different time zones, different countries. So we can localize this now with the e-learning. It provides them with important day one, week one information that they need, all of the critical things about what our tool set looks like. It provides them look at later information, not to digest right away. But for example, if you're going to be new to Teams and you're having trouble, where would you go to get help with it? But most importantly, it profiles and highlights some of the really exciting new things, award-winning things, industry-facing things that we have co-built with our business partners, and talks about them in a little bit of detail. things that resonate with our science and our researchers, things that resonate with the folks in the commercial area, empowering our field force, all of that across the board. So they really get a feel for what kinds of things are possible with IT, and that all of the innovation and all of the collaboration that goes on with our treatment and drug research is powered by an IT engine underneath, delivering really robust and helpful compute capabilities. This was, I think, important for us because, again, during the pandemic, we hired something like 30% new workforce. They weren't here to experience the enculturation process of lively talk in the lunchroom or having coffee and brainstorming ideas. So it was really critical to kind of start to get across what we call our Regeneron way, which is a set of our core values. So the collaboration and some of the other things that we were highlighting really kind of started to speak to the be great together corporate value. Next slide, if you wouldn't mind, David. Thank you. So the impact was a really big deal on a lot of fronts. We don't have to have someone in person every Monday morning standing in front of a classroom. It's a little thing, but it was helpful to us. We're a relatively small function. And it also, I guess, downstream meant that now the new hires have a much shorter classroom orientation experience. It gets them with their manager, with their team, with their new colleagues for all of the immersion, simulation, enculturation type activities in their department. We don't keep them there as long. Additionally, I think it's helped us rebrand and make a better first impression. Our perception among our colleagues is one of the things that we measure frequently. And this is one of the many different steps that IT has taken that have significantly improved the way we as a department are positioned. And as is very important to IT, we need to know about some of these things earlier and sooner in the development process rather than later or near the end. And so we're encouraging folks as they're joining to think about the technology component to their work much sooner, which means we're getting earlier engagement. It helps us to help them from the ground with the solution. And we are now perceived as someone who has a seat at the table in these conversations rather than someone that can help you with a password reset. So net, it's been a meaningful and fantastic impact on us as a department, but I think also as on the workforce. They have what they need to get productive and do what they need to do for their roles right away, but then they also know who to turn to when it's time to invent something fantastic.
That's great. All right. Now I think I want to turn to Alison, and you can talk a little bit about what's going on at PepsiCo.
Absolutely. So this is an interesting story of, I think we could call it going from good or very good to great. And this is a program that we had existing and we revamped it. We changed all aspects of it. It's one of our largest onboarding programs within PepsiCo Foods North America. It's for our frontline sales leaders. So who are these people? These are college hires. These are also experienced hires. These are internal promotes. About 500 people go through this annually. So it's a lot. It's a high volume program that's experiencing this onboarding. I'll say by way of background that when we realized that we had some technology that was going away, that we could make this program a little bit more modern, there were some things that were making us think, okay, it's really time to redo and revamp this program. We embarked on a very comprehensive needs assessment or needs analysis. So, if you know what kind of things you're trying to solve, then you can design a really great program. So we surveyed 400 plus people, lots of people. And we basically asked them about aspects of the program and saying, how well does this onboarding set people up for success in their roles? We also did a design thinking workshop, lots of ways that we use to get to the right answer here. How is this program going to be designed? And it was not a quick process, but it was a process that worked. So I'll say, here's what we discovered with all that. One size doesn't fit all, because we were talking about different roles that we were putting in this platform. And we were trying to onboard. Networking and that peer learning is really valuable to people. They loved it. Also, continuous support is really important for people's success. They needed support throughout the whole entire onboarding. We couldn't just be like, rah, rah, it's great in the beginning and then it falls off. So we needed to create kind of like a community of support. People needed better feedback as they were going along and trying to learn and practice. We also discovered that when you have real scenarios, that drives better participation and better preparation in the end. Obviously, we've talked about this, but just lecture-based learning doesn't work that well. And then we also, of course, had to rein ourselves in. We weren't going to put everything in there that we thought people might need to know, because that would be a lot, too much, in fact. Okay, so let's keep on moving. Right, so what we ended up with was a role-based curriculum, and the approach is kind of, it's not completely linear. So it's not like pieces are building on each other. The driver is the learner. So the learner has a platform to go on, and all of the activities and all of the resources are there. And the learner can check those off and decide what to do next, etc. And I think, as I mentioned, we have, when the person first goes in, we have them select what roles have you done in the past. And that's where we're eliminating some parts of onboarding that may not be relevant to them. So when we say flexible time to proficiency, that's what we mean. This program can range from something like 14 weeks to 23 weeks, depending on if you were already an internal hire. So maybe you got to skip some of those pieces because you already knew it. So flexible time to proficiency. And we included a lot of different experiences in here. You can see we have a discussion board in here, but we also have route training, all kinds of learning experiences, e-learning, group activities, time and market, working with other people, one-on-one time, and then self-guided content. I mentioned the e-learning, but there's a lot of resources also within this platform that we built. Another thing, people love to see their progress. So we have certificates. So people get like little badges and certificates once they complete certain parts of the program. And they really love that part. Okay, we can keep going. Yep. Yeah, and so I kind of talked through this. This is what our platform looks like. So we have a program that we call Frontline Leader Onboarding. We also have this platform that houses all of the experiences and all of the materials and really shows people their progress. So it's a little bit of an eye chart the way we're looking at it now, but it's a really dynamic program. And it's also mobile friendly. So you could use that on your phone. So again, they get to look and see what's available and what's next in their program. Their manager and also mentors can check in on them. So they can look at this program and say, okay, how's Jennifer doing? How's David doing in the program? Is he behind? Do I need to reach out? They love that. And so I talked about community of support. That's one of the elements. Another element is that we created role guides for their manager, for HR, for their mentor, for all of the people around them, essentially to say, what is my role in making this new hire successful? And so, because often in onboarding programs, people around new hires want to help. They just don't know exactly what they need to do or how can I best help? And so this was kind of like the village concept that Rahul talked about, bringing other people in to create that community of support.
Yeah, that's something that's popped up in our research over the last year or so. Is companies are waking up to this critical role that the manager plays in learning in general, right? So many we found that company managers aren't involved at all. A lot of managers don't even know what their teams are learning. They don't even know what programs they're in. It's like making sure the manager is aware of what there is, and then getting them involved. Because when you talk about, they're the ones that are closest to that person's day-to-day life. They're the one that knows what their flow of work is. They know what their strengths, weaknesses are, much more than the L&D professional would know. So really getting the managers involved, I think that's a great element to this. Sorry, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah.
It lines so well with our research.
Right, and the advantage of that is that you're sort of spreading the wealth. You're not just depending on that person's manager. You have some mentors. You have, in our case, sales trainers. Other people around them can help. I was looking at Eric's comment that popped up in the chat about badges and points are fun at first, but interest can fade unless you can spend the points on merch. Actually, we do. We have a merch shop. We have like a little online merchandise shop with all kinds of branded fun stuff, from socks to, I don't know, shirts and backpacks and earrings that look like Doritos or whatever. So they can earn points along their onboarding, and also people around them, like their mentor, their manager, can award them points. They get more and more points and they can cash those in and, have some swag. So they love that.
Nice.
We keep going. Yeah, so, well, what do we uncover about this new approach? People really appreciate it. They really loved it because everybody has visibility into what I do next and where is my new hire in the process. And also this networking component online, they can kind of introduce themselves and meet other people. They also do that in group activities and in mini capstones and other things. So they have lots of ways to engage with others. Yeah, and so my onboarding has been so successful and people love it so much because it's dynamic. So we're going to add more roles to my onboarding, and it won't just be for sales. So we're looking at expanding to other functions, perhaps supply chain, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the chat, that came through, somebody mentioned that you're using SharePoint a lot for.
Yeah. This is actually
that's blowing people's minds in the chat, by the way.
Yeah, this is actually a very fancy SharePoint.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know it, but it looks great and it has logic in there and it's a SharePoint.
Kudos to your team then, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I'll say that I didn't really add in is that we talked about sort of like setting the tone in the very beginning. Our sales organization does this very well. We call it the big warm welcome. And so that is time where the new hire comes in and does meet and greets. They get their device set up. They may do some shadowing of people doing their jobs, etc. So that is just a welcome to PFNA and fun and meet people and those kinds of things.
Nice. Those are cool little touches for sure. Actually, so, Rahul, I was going to turn to you if you wouldn't mind to sort of talk a little bit about, for folks that want a little more detail, some more research, some more insights around this entire topic. EI Design EI and MPS has an ebook around emotional intelligence and workplace learning, which this is a core part of, right? Like bringing people into the organization. So I know it's available. I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about this book, Rahul.
Yeah, I'll get that in a minute, David, if that's okay. Just want to make a quick comment on the fact that, one of the unique things that across both these programs, that across Regeneron and PepsiCo was although they were solving a problem for a unique audience set, both programs have been developed in such a way that they are immensely scalable. So at the next level, if they do decide to scale this to different parts of the organizations, the way they've been constructed allows for that. And I think that to me, was a big takeaway, and for me personally, the scalability of the programs. Jennifer, Alison, do you want to talk a little bit about that, about the scalability of and what's next in terms of these programs for you?
For us, I mean, I loved hearing Alison say that this was so dynamic that other areas want to do the same thing. I would actually go a step further, Rahul, and say it almost facilitated the scalability. I don't think we would have had the same impact in terms of pulling our new hires into things without a delivery mechanism and a modality like this. So it's definitely helping. And the work that we'll need to do to continue as we add another half dozen or more markets this year, it's really just going to be about localizing the language. The rest of it translates very well. And it's an extremely helpful tool as we scale this year.
Yeah, I'll just add a side note that says that everything we do is for scale, because we're such a large company. And so everything we build, I said 500 people go through my onboarding, frontline leader onboarding, and use my onboarding every year. And so, yeah, so we build for scale.
Yeah, and it's a very important thing to talk about. It's come up in the chat as I've been trying to keep up with everyone. It's been a great conversation. Hopefully people are reading through all that. But that came up is we talk about things like, oh, we want it to be just in time and just for you. We want it to be relevant and not duplicative and, that kind of thing. And that's all well and good. But then when you start to talk about scale, people say, how am I possibly going to be able to do that at this scale? But you look at an organization, like a PepsiCo, which obviously is at that scale that they're thinking. It can be done. Obviously, it starts with, a strategy and ideas and a process, but this is one of those things where technology is clearly going to be the sort of gateway to scale, right? But it starts with coming up with the right plan, because technology is only going to do whatever it is you've set it to do. And if you're doing it poorly, it'll scale that too. So the idea is getting the right plan in place and then finding the right technology that aligns with your goals, outcomes, your plan, this is the kind of experience we want to provide, this sort of just in time, this be able to practice all of those elements that we sort of talked about. There are technologies that will help you scale that. It's just about firming up that strategy and that approach and getting people to buy in. I don't know if any other thoughts on scale, because it came up enough times in chat that I want to make sure we touch on.
Well, I'd also say that, that's scale has to do with your technology, but also has to do with the other roles that you have supporting your onboarding and your learning programs. We have sales trainers for our sales organization. We also have people doing route training. So we have various other roles that get to interact with the new hires during this program. So scale, yes, technology, but also who's helping you along the way.
Yeah.
Only other thing, I like that point a lot, Alison. And the only other thing I would add is that what has really, I think, helped us be successful, we've already had to do a fair bit of scaling, and we're going to double in size by the end of next year, which is a wonderful thought. But I think we did the thinking, did the planning, and sort of thought about the scalability when we were deciding what to include, what not to include, and how to present what we're doing. So to me, you save yourself, it's a more efficient process, and you save yourself having to think about scaling as you're scaling. If you build it in at the beginning, something that will continue to scale and can be maintained and enhanced rather than scrapped and redone every time you add a couple of thousand people. So that's been helpful and critical to us.
Yeah. Scale, I think, to add on, scale also means building, if you're doing some kind of group or live sessions, that you can do them virtual or you can do them instructor led, live or virtual. So it's not always exactly the same. I mean, you have different kinds of activities, of course, in a virtual environment. So you have to think about that when you're talking about scale.
Yeah.
So a couple more questions there coming through. Alison, back to you. The first thing is that DC wanted you to know that the warm welcome is the capital MOST, the most important element of your program. But then there is a question from Genevieve. Oh, wait, it went away. Someone answered it in the typing. So Genevieve, your question was answered in the place. But here's one. We mentioned SharePoint. So Alison, and they were wondering, they think that's great that you're using that, but the question is, do you build or you buy for an onboarding platform? And to me, I think I said to you, kudos to your team. If you've got the team that can build with those tools, then go for it. But I think you do have to have people who know what they're doing to get SharePoint to do those kinds of things. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, we needed something custom because we needed that sort of role-based approach where people could say, I've had these other roles, and so I'll skip the learning associated with those roles that's in this program. But we needed something that was very custom and flexible. We just couldn't find that. You just couldn't buy it off the shelf. So it's not for the faint of heart to build something, I would say, but it's worth it if you really need a customized solution. You can make a great one.
Yeah.
I want to add to that, Alison, though, I commend the team on picking something, I guess, mainstream and well-maintained, like a nice, sturdy Microsoft product like SharePoint, because I think you did it the right way in that you customized what the end users, what your learners see, but your back end is something nice and stable and reliable that, Microsoft as the product maker is going to continue to maintain and enhance. And it's got a lot of longevity that way. I might say fully custom, completely ground up scratch would be a little risky because technology changes so quickly, but a decision like PepsiCo made, or in our case, we picked very standard tool set and it deploys into an LMS. Things that play well over the long term also kind of facilitates, I think, the longevity and the expandability that you're looking for in a function like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's great IT perspective from you, Jennifer.
I could resist.
Yeah, I was saying, you've probably been in situations where the customizations have sort of boxed in a solution where if you overly customize something, soon you can't do anything else, or else it'll break. So yeah, it's a tricky proposition, but done well, definitely will work. Actually, and so Jennifer, I'll ask you this next question from Bob. Obviously you both have presented these case studies, and that we've got these programs that you find to be successful. How long were you tracking the program before you thought to yourself, or the group thought, well, this works? Like, how long, did it take to sort of from conception to execution to say, hey, this is working?
For us, there's something about our culture. We have this do the right thing, value, be great together, value. And I guess one of the cornerstones of our value set is this collaboration, which translates in this instance into rapid feedback. So we were hearing from learners and new joiners pretty quickly about a positive experience, the right amount of information, the right amount of time. We were telling them the right things. We continue to solicit feedback, of course, particularly as the demographics of the workforce are changing. We're getting different cultures pulled in, different demographics from an age perspective, for example. So we're continuing to gather the feedback. But to me, learner feedback is probably one of the most robust measurement mechanisms for us. If our learners are enjoying it and we're continuing to get feedback that they're finding it helpful and it's working for them, then that felt pretty quickly like we were heading in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. And Alison, sort of, you can either answer the question in terms of that, like, how long did you track it for? But then there was another question that came in directly for you, similar lines of how long did it take to actually build the solution, like sort of from ideation to launch?
Yeah, I many months. So it's
right.
a long haul. We are just now celebrating our 1-year anniversary of having launched this program, Frontline Leader Onboarding, with the platform My Onboarding. So we have 1 year's worth of data, and about 500 people went through it. So we know from all the people around that they had really positive responses. And again, like if you're using something like SharePoint, you've got a lot more data points because we have surveys in there. We can see where people are in their onboarding. We can even share, where people are with their coaches and mentors and managers, et cetera. So it's built for metrics. I would say really quickly we knew that we were onto something very good.
Nice. One of you, and I apologize off the top of my head, I can't remember, mentioned either simulations or scenarios, and I don't know if you were talking about it sort of in the abstract that these are helpful or they actually have them in your programs.
We have them.
Okay, so someone was asking the question about that, like what is that? What are the ways you've used simulations in the onboarding program?
Yeah, we have. So I'll just highlight one thing. We use them in different ways, but because we have a lot of like sort of breakouts and practice type things. But I'll say, so after they finish the big bulk of their onboarding, you may have seen on one of the slides, we have these things called mini capstones at 30, 60, and 90 days. That's a fancy way to say we're getting people back together in a group to teach them about a specific topic, and it's fun, it's themed, it's peer learning. So our mini capstones, the 3 of them, focus on selling, leading, and then tools and processes. So we're doing all kinds of scenarios in there. So we're saying, like, imagine here's the setup, and we play them a fun video or whatever, and then we get them to role play and practice something. And so again, feedback and peer discussion.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, so we've managed to hit all of the questions. Either they were answered, via typing. So if you didn't hear us ask your question, look for an answer via text in there, as well as the discussion we were having. The chat has been amazing. I hope there's so many resources flying by in there that people are sharing their thoughts and their insights. So much great stuff. So hopefully people are paying attention to that and looking at that. Some amazing stuff. I just want to thank my team for joining me today and having this conversation with me and sharing your experiences. Obviously, I don't think folks get a lot of opportunity to hear what's going on at the organizations kind of like yours that are dealing with all of these things. So we appreciate it. And of course, thanks to Rahul and EI for providing us the hour and putting on the webinar today. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was recorded. You'll get a copy of the recording emailed to you within about 24 hours, 48 hours. I believe, and I'm afraid to get quoted on this, but I believe the chat is available with that as well. I think it comes with, so if folks can look at that and see what everyone was saying. in there. But yeah, just once again, thanks to everybody for joining us, and thanks for all the interaction. That was fantastic. Jennifer and Alison, thank you for sharing your stories. Actually, if you know, Jennifer, you have anything you want to say, I'll let you have a word, and then we'll give Alison last word, and then maybe Rahul, you can close us out.
Oh, just best of luck to everyone, and be adventurous who's on the chat and who's been listening to pick up some best practices. I think from Alison and I both, you probably picked up, hopefully you picked up some things that will be practical, but for a relatively small company and a very big company, it's good that you're thinking about these things, and best of luck with your onboarding adventures going forward.
Alison?
Yeah, I'll just say, don't be afraid to try things out. I'm kind of echoing what Jennifer said. It takes a while to get from, you know, let's say you have a good program to a great program. Try different things. It's okay. I mean, as long as you get people connected and you're serving them kind of the right information all different ways and let them be in the driver's seat, I think you're in a good position with onboarding. Your people will start with the right tone.
Great. And Rahul, any last thoughts?
Yeah, just that, you know, onboarding is an emotional process and EQ eats IQ. So think about that when you're designing something like this. You are kind of developing a path and a journey for people that have joined your organization. So it is a tremendous responsibility.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much. And hopefully we'll see you again on another webinar. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.